So what happens here is that we are going to leave the intrapsychic domain and go into the cognitive experiential domain. So we're going to look at how personality develops from a different perspective or a different domain, cognitive experiential domain. This domain emphasizes an understanding of people's perceptions, thoughts, emotions, desires, and other conscious experiences. There we go. Definition on your PowerPoint. So we see how these conscious experiences, like our perceptions, our thoughts, our emotions, our desires, tell us, we see how those tell us about someone's personality in this domain. And we're going to look at personality revealed through perception and personality revealed through interpretation. So let's look at perception first. So personality revealed through perception. So we're going to look at the differences that people can have in perceiving a situation or event or an object, and how those differences reveal something about that person's personality. It's pretty neat. So one area that we're going to look at, it's called field dependence. And it's really just in general, it's a person's perceptual ability to look beyond the details to get to the big picture. That's in general what field dependence means. So a person's perceptual ability to look beyond the details to get to the big picture of something, of anything, of a situation, of an object, of a picture. As a matter of fact, researchers use the embedded figures test, EFT. They use that most often to explore this thing called field dependence. So they use the embedded figures test, which is a famous test, so you should remember that name, to explore whether a person is field dependent or what they call field independent. And what that means is field dependence versus field independence. Comparing people who have a high perceptual ability to look beyond the details versus those who focus on the details. So let's look at the embedded figures test. This is actually what it looks like. And it says on the top, can you find these hidden pictures? See the little words appear. Can you find these hidden pictures? And go ahead and look. See if you can find the pictures at the top in the figure at the bottom. If you want to hit pause on my lecture right now to give yourself a minute, go ahead and do that. Okay, so here's what researchers found out. So however long it took you, there's 12 objects on top, and they're all, 12 of these are all somewhere in this big figure down here. So however long it took you to find those kind of puts you into either field dependent or field independent. Look, our F got a little tiny there, isn't that funny? However long it took puts you into whether they call field dependent or field independent. So if you look at the big picture, the bottom, but you're not so quick to pick those figures out, the little embedded figures, you're called field dependent. So field dependent people can see the big picture well, but they're not so great, not so quick to see the embedded figures. Oh, and that should be an S, embedded figures. Field independent people can quickly spot embedded figures. So the overall picture, if you ask them questions about what's going on in the big scene, they may not be able to tell you that so well, but they can spot those embedded figures very quickly. That's called field independent. So picking out the details, the entire picture, it's independent of them. They see the objects independently from the background larger picture. They focus on the details. So if you've ever heard the saying, can't see the forest for the trees, you can't see the forest for the trees, these people field dependent see the forest. These field independent people focus on the individual trees. So now, why it's so interesting to personality researchers is whether a person is deemed to be field dependent or independent. Turns out it is a stable, characteristic over time. Decades later, we tend to still be somewhere on the continuum where we were years before. So again, we're all on the continuum. We're either high in field dependence or we're high in field independence, which would put us low on this continuum if you do it that way. If you put one on one side, one on the other, we tend to be somewhere in this continuum and we tend to stay there. That's the stability characteristic of it. Another interesting aspect of this quality is this perceptual ability. We'll call it a perceptual ability. It's found to correlate to life domains such as social relations and education. So social relations, like, for example, field dependent people who see the big picture but not the individual figures. So people field dependent, they were found to rely on social information and frequently ask other people for their opinion. So when they're in situations, they rely on the social information around them and they frequently ask other people for their opinions. They are attentive to social cues. They're oriented toward other people. They prefer to be with other people. They get along well with others. They're productive in social situations. Just in general, they have strong social skills. Again, those are field dependent people who see the big picture. Now, field independent people, it turns out they tend to be those who see the details, that can focus on the embedded figures and see the details. Those are field independent people. These people tend to be more autonomous, do things on their own. They're less socially oriented. They're more productive in less social situations. If you gave them a very tedious project to do and they had to do it by themselves, they do very well in that situation. They probably don't do well, and actually it turns out they don't do well in big social projects, or they wouldn't do well in a social situation. So people tend to do better in careers if they're field independent. Those who see the details, they do better in careers which require them to focus on details quickly. They're skillful in analyzing complex situations. They can extract information from multiple distractors. They can focus on what's important. So I'll give you an example. Police officers, those who are considered very high in field independence, so they're called field independent, they do better, so they see the details, they do better on simulated shooting situations where they have to decide very quickly if they're in danger and they should indeed shoot a suspect. A police officer who is field independent does better because they extract the details very quickly. They don't get lost in the overall picture. They can dissect it and look at the details very quickly. And by the way, when they in general, when they are giving descriptions of suspects involved in situations, they give much more detailed descriptions. So again, you can see how being field dependent or independent has a relationship with social relations and kind of where you put yourself, your career, where you might flourish, but also education. So it turns out that research shows that choice of major in college is correlated with field dependence and field independence. For example, those who see the big picture, field dependent. So they're dependent on the big picture, field dependent people. Those people who were in college, they tended to favor the social sciences like psychology, sociology, history, and also education. So you can see those are kind of majors where the student would have to see big picture issues often. Whereas those who ended up being field independent people, they focus on the details very quickly. They tended to be college students who favored majors in the natural sciences, biology, chemistry, physics, math, engineering. They tended to choose majors more in line like that, where details are very, very important. And one is not better, so you can't judge whether is it better to be field independent or field dependent, because there isn't one better than the other. We're all somewhere on the continuum. Both have advantages for certain situations and certain careers, and both have disadvantages. So it's just interesting to personality psychologists where people fall in that, because it does have this interesting stability and correlating to life domains such as social relations and education. Okay, so now Roman numeral 2 on your outline is personality revealed through interpretation. So it turns out two people can witness the same event or experience the same event, live through the same thing, and really have two completely different interpretations. And you may know someone like that. You may have both been through something, and then when you go to tell it to a third party, you both tell very different stories, even though you experienced the same event. You might be in the same class with someone, and when they talk about the instructor or that class, they're just, oh, I hated it. It's so boring. It's so hard. It's just awful. And you might think, I find it interesting, or I find it challenging. I kind of like it. So again, people can experience the same event but have two completely different interpretations. Our interpretation of events, like we're just talking about, in an environment continuously helps us answer questions about the world. So we might ask, why did a person commit a certain crime? Or why is someone wealthy or poor or successful or struggling? What do I need to do to have a successful relationship? How do I succeed at my job or at academics or in life? Our interpretations will influence our answers. And one way that we interpret the world is through what we call locus of control. So locus of control in general is just the tendency to believe that life events are or are not under our control. That's what locus of control means in general. Whether we believe life events are or are not under our personal control, our personal responsibility. That's locus of control. And we're either considered externally, we have an external locus of control, or we have an internal locus of control. So if you see on your PowerPoint, external locus of control, somebody who has an external locus of control, they generally believe that life events are outside of their control. They tend to believe that outcomes are dependent on external forces. And some external forces, I put a few down there: fate, luck, powerful others, whether it be that teacher hates me, or my landlord's such a jerk to me. He doesn't like musicians and I play music, and that's why he's so mean to me. Someone who has an external locus of control explains life events as being outside of their own control. Whereas the opposite, internal locus of control people tend to believe that life events are indeed under their own control. They feel that they have responsibility for the major outcomes in their life. And they believe that outcomes depend mainly on their own personal efforts, not powerful others, not fate, not luck, but the decisions they themselves make. So for example, if you think about the last time you did really well on something, on a test, on an exam, on something you did, think about how you explain it to somebody else. If someone says, hey, how'd you do on that test? If you say, I did really well, but that teacher kind of likes me. I think the test was kind of easy. Material is just, interesting. That's an external explanation, an external locus of control explanation for how you did. If someone says, how'd you do on that test? And you say, I studied really hard. I did well. Thanks for asking. But you know what? I really kind of worked my tail off for that one. I really did work hard for that. And I kind of studied a little bit every couple days, kind of kept it fresh. And yeah, I did well. Thanks. That's an internal locus of control. It was your choices and your behaviors that brought about that outcome. And if somebody does poorly, if you think about the last time you did really poorly on something, and think of anyone who's done poorly. If you have a roommate or a friend that did poorly on a test and they say, oh my gosh, the teacher hates me, or it was stupid, I couldn't understand it. It was just the worst worded test I've ever seen. I couldn't even make heads or tails of it. Or, it was just, I had too many tests that day. There's no way I could study. All of those are an external locus of control. But if you say I did poorly because I didn't do what I needed to do to get ready for it, or I just didn't realize what it was going to take to get ready for it, quite honestly, that's an internal locus of control. And we know people, you're thinking probably right now, oh, I know someone who's really a strong external locus of control, and you might know someone who's really strong internal locus of control. And I put an interesting link on here, and I'll click on it in a minute, to assess your own locus of control. But by the way, so in general, this chapter just tells us that how we view the world, how we perceive the world, and how we interpret the world, like locus of control, helps to determine who we become, our personality. So if you take a look at this, you put your name up here, you click OK, and welcome, Joe. Click the next button, click on the button next to the one statement that best describes how you feel. You can always go back to a question and change your answer. So just go through here and click. So if I say, many of the unhappy things in people's lives are partly due to bad luck, or if I say people's misfortunes result from the mistakes they make. I pick one. One of the major reasons why we have wars is because people don't take enough interest in politics. I kind of believe that. There will always be wars no matter how hard people try to prevent them. So if I pick one, so just go through, scroll down, and then when you get to the very end, you're going to click your score, and scores range from 0 to 13. A high score indicates an external locus of control. Low score indicates an internal locus of control. This research, these questions are based on a particular researcher named Rotter, and he's done a lot of work with locus of control. And you can go ahead and see where you fall. And that's this chapter.